1661 It spread like a virus. Part 8. Nothing is known of Gon the sightless freak, not even how we came to know the ancient's name. None have ever seen them, even in dreams. The few cultists who have dreamed of Gon report a world shrouded in darkness. A place without sight, or sound, or touch, or taste or smell. We don't even know why the cultists have these visions. They have received no message from the ancient, gained no wisdom or insight. All they have is blind eyes, tasteless tongues, deaf ears, useless noses and unfeeling hands. The freak will not be witnessed in any way, by anyone. Excerpt from Collective Wisdom of the Cults, by Granin Lazus. The Golgari liked things to come in threes. The melding of minds was a tradition even older than their use of the second skin. From that unity flowed the formation of the triads, the master and students, the creation of the circles and the structure of Golgari society around the world. Perhaps this was why, Aran Thoris mused, they had decided to play with 9 aside, rather than 10. She sat, with Marsban and Irisad the court mage by her side, watching as young Golgari, perhaps only a few months into wearing their stone flesh, shifted the ball back and forth, running and laughing while they played. It's interesting, Marsban mused, hand resting on his palm as he watched. Look at the way they move it. I haven't seen our people do that. Aran nodded thoughtfully. There were many differences between the Brathians and the Golgari. Physically, the Golgari were imposing figures, usually more than 7 feet, with strength of limb beyond what most races were capable of. Despite being young, the youths were able to lift and carry the ball without difficulty. They would throw it, kick it, unafraid that the hard stone of the ball would break their bones or even abrade their flesh. The people of the stone have always been meat-headed. More brawn than brains, Irisad sniffed. Our people must use more dignified methods. I think they would prefer the term rock-headed, Marsban commented dryly. And look, you can already see there's some shapers down there. Indeed, working with magic was seen as a lesser profession amongst the Golgari, preferring to venerate their warriors instead. Even so, the Golgari shapers are literally the best manipulators of stone in the world, Marsban said. I think Tunnel Ball might be right up their alley. Indeed, as Aran watched, 2 boys who were clearly shapers in training were able to shape the stone with incredible precision, creating loops and curves to turn and throw the ball without having to touch it. Before long, they hardened the ball and started punting it about by creating pillars of rock to smack it around. Where did they even learn it from? Aran wondered aloud. We've only been here for a few hours. It can't have come from us. The colony isn't welcome here, so it can't be from them. So who else is spreading this game? This particular trade mission had only just arrived on business from the satrap. He'd decided to invest in some rare gemstone ventures within the Empire of Stone, and Aran had not long ago disembarked her ship, only to find that Tunnel Ball had even spread here, where hatred for the ants ran high. After Anthony had rocked an entire mountain, they really didn't like the colony. They still bought a surprising amount of cheap, ant-produced goods, though. I think I might have an answer for you, Marsban said, nodding his head off to their right. Aran turned to see some folk emerging from a docked ship, blades in their hands and a stone ball carried between 2 of them. They called out and the Golgari cheered when they saw them coming. Before too long, they had a few small games going, blade light flashing as the balls bounced to and fro. Rather than a proper game of Tunnel Ball, it was almost as if they were playing an elaborate game of keep-away, as those without the ball tried to seize it, while those in possession tried to pass the ball around and keep it safe. Without a proper field on which to play, this was as close an approximation to Tunnel Ball as they could make. Although, the dock may not have been the best place for it. They ducked and wove through dense traffic and shipping crates, with more than a few close calls. The skill on display was honestly impressive, but it was only a matter of time before there was a serious accident. When the authorities finally shut them down, the players protested good-naturedly but gave way in the face of the furious guards. Aran had one question on her mind. She turned to Marsban. The folk are playing Tunnel Ball? She demanded. He shrugged. It would appear so. How else would they have the ball? You know what this means. He frowned. I do. We can never lose to them, she insisted. The dignity of our people must be upheld. It's not going to be easy, Marsban muttered, stroking his chin as he considered the dire problem before them. We play underwater. There's no way the furry folk will ever agree to give us a home field advantage like that. We can make water wherever we play. I insist that the Tunnel Ball fields be moved to the surface. The ants have also made that point. The standard rules for interleague and international matches demand a dry field. The very thought of having to sit and watch as a Brathian team was defeated by the folk was enough to make her fins stand on edge. They had the advantage in the dueling arenas, and they never let anyone hear the end of it. Something had to be done. The conglomerate would have to marshal all possible advantages as effectively as possible. I need to talk to the satrap as soon as we return, she declared. We need to invest heavily in our tunnel ball players. New practice grounds, coaching, skill development and research. We must harness every edge we possibly can. Hire ants if that's what it takes. When the time comes, we will crush all opposition. She thought of how well the Golgari had seemed to take to the game. If it spread here as well, just how strong would their teams be? The thought only firmed her resolve even further. No matter what they had to spend, they would win. Marsban nodded, sharing her determination. I believe my brother will agree wholeheartedly. He loves money a little less than he hates losing. 1662 It spread like a virus Part 9. Many have debated the exact meaning of the name attached to Yolesh the ever-dying. Is the ancient some form of undead? Is it a boast to state how Yolesh cannot truly die? Does it have another meaning altogether? Amongst the worshippers of Yolesh, there is no consensus, but there are a few prevalent views, the most common among them being that the aura of undeath that surrounds the ancient is fueled by its own life force. In that sense, Yolesh is always dying, burning its own life to maintain its power. Whether that means the ancient is destined to die, or if it can replace what it loses, we can only guess. What is known, is where Yolesh surfaced during the rending. The Valley of Eternal Mist is home to the undead to this day. No matter how many times they are killed, no matter how thoroughly, they still return. Perhaps an example of the true nature of Yolesh. Excerpt from Collective Wisdom of the Cults, by Granin Lazuz. The diplomats of the colony had never imagined that their work would become so simple. The folk were clamoring for teams to leave Anthome and tour their territories. Inquiries about visiting the home of Tunnel Ball had skyrocketed, with thousands expressing interest in seeing how the game was played by the creatures who'd created it. Cultural exchange and acceptance between the colony and folk, which had seemed so difficult at first, a project of decades, was accelerating by leaps and bounds every week. The Brathian had also caught the bug. From the most recent reports, the Brathian Island conglomerate was paying for ant coaches and teams, even putting up a hefty fee to recruit a team of carvers to demonstrate the official construction methods for their own builders. News of the game was spreading along the shipping routes, causing other conglomerates to reach out, desperate not to be left behind by their competition. It seemed like everywhere the colony went, as long as Tunnel Ball was also there, they were welcomed with open arms. The conversations were easy, the compromises flowed smoothly, agreements were made, signed, sealed and delivered before the tea got cold. Diplomat could not have been more pleased. What they had assumed would take them 10 years would be done before 12 months had passed. All because of a training exercise the farmers liked to watch. As she stood, looking over the edge of the flying ship rising above the shimmering sapphire waters of the Forth, she could only admit that her role was no longer to represent the colony in international negotiations. No, everything had changed. Her role was to spread Tunnel Ball as far and as fast as an ant possibly could. If the locals were playing the game, then they would reach out to the colony on their own. All the ants had to do was sit back and wait, sipping tea and eating cake. It was simple. She hired ships and sent out folk, Brathian, Golgari, Carmado, even a few Bruinchi, who had learned the game while serving in the battalions. They would play demonstration games, teach children and adults, organize matches between the locals. Over a few weeks, they would build interest, develop a following for the game, and inevitably conversations would turn to perhaps creating a proper field, organizing regular games. At this moment, the colony would swoop in. You need a field. We will build it, free of charge. Would you like some training? Would you like to see an ant team play? Of course, we will happily sponsor your best team to tour the fourth stratum, we will do it every year. After a month or two, she would turn up with her fellow diplomats. How do you feel about trade? Would you like to recognize the colony as an independent, free nation of sapient creatures? I'm afraid recognizing our sovereignty and right to exist is a requirement of participation in the World Cup. Wonderful to have your agreement in this matter. Let us toast with a fine cup of loose-leaf tea and scones. It worked like one of the Silver City's magical clocks, as predictable as the turning of gears and the swing of a pendulum. An unprecedented level of diplomatic success. Reports from the spies within the Church of the Path said the priests' heads were spinning. Trying to unite the sapient races against the ants was almost impossible as the game opened doors left, right and center. Not that they didn't have some success. They would need to be dealt with eventually, likely when the eldest awoke. For now, Diplomat would, to borrow a human expression, make hay while the sun was shining. However, of all the races, kingdoms, fiefdoms, free cities and islands to which she had spread the game, there was one that caused her some level of concern. The reputation of these people was such that she wondered if they would even be interested in Tunnel Ball. On some level, she was almost more worried if they did take an interest. With a slight jolt, the flying ship bumped into the dock. The crew jumped about, yelling instructions, throwing ropes and tying things down, and soon enough it was time to alight. Along with her escorts, Diplomat skittered down the ramp, her eyes taking in the incredible view from the floating island in the sky. She'd asked, of course, whether or not the locals had taken to the game, but all she'd heard back was that she would have to see it for herself. It didn't take long for her to see what her agent had meant. Are you fair dinkum mate? The ball was in. You wanna have a go, mate? Cause, I'll go. I'm dyin' ta go. Shut your pie holes, you drongos. Get your thick heads back in the game. Quote. Fine, cheering erupted as play got back underway. Come on, you good thing. Get 'em. Ball, where's the flamin' call? Hey, I'm the umpire, not you. Shut your flamin' mouth. Oh, you wanna have a go, then? Soon, two magpie, one in an official umpire's uniform, were grappling and fighting in the skies as play continued beneath them. Diplomat clacked her mandibles slowly, unsure if she should be pleased, or in despair. Everywhere she looked on the outskirts of this one small town, they were playing tunnel ball, or fighting about tunnel ball, or both at the same time. The magpie were legendary for their fiery tempers, impressive physical strength, shocking durability and recovery, and undying love for hitting each other. It was entirely possible they would dominate the world of tunnel ball. It was built for them. 1663 It spread like a virus. Part 10. Far to the west of the lands claimed by the Golgari, over the sunken ocean and beyond the burning islands, the vast area known as the Somnos jungle lies. Outside of the cults, there are few who remember the reason it is named so. The Legion, almost certainly, as they were the ones who named it, and perhaps the Wallach tribes who live there still. This is the place where Larawin surfaced. According to legend, it was barren when she arose, but that was something she was more than capable of fixing. The trees, ferns, vines and flowers of that jungle sleep now, but they remember their master, even thousands of years later, when the original plants the ancient created have died and rotted away. When she wakes, the jungle stirs to life, for it is part of her, even now. Excerpt from Collective Wisdom of the Cults, by Granin Lazuz. You want me to play with this ball? Rasentep looked doubtfully at the stone sphere, perhaps a meter in diameter, that the ants had rolled into his chamber. He had hoped to be given an opportunity to see the ant, Anthony, again, or at least to engage with the Golgari, Granin. As a fellow cultist, he was eager to see the progress of the potential ancient, but it was proving to be difficult. He shifted his weight, causing the golden jewelry that adorned his scaled limbs and back to chime most beautifully. Unknown to all but his Setsula, Amanzel, that particular chime was designed to signify confusion and wariness. Like the trusted, spirit-bonded servant he was, Amanzel gave no indication he had received the message but stepped forward smoothly. Rasentep is an honored elder among Karmado. It is not suitable for one of his dignity to be playing games in the dirt. The ant before them nodded their head understandingly. It was interesting to see these monsters slowly begin to adopt the mannerisms of other races. Particularly these diplomatic ants. They were capable of communicating emotion in even the simplest of gestures in a way a Karmado could understand. We would not ask any Karmado, let alone an elder, to do something that lacked dignity. Other Karmado, including some elders, have participated before, some of them visiting the colony, others who have decided to lie amongst us. The game we propose is a test of skill, reflexes, strategy, strength and endurance. Rasentep shook himself ever so slightly, once again setting his adornments to chime slowly. His faithful Setsula understood his meaning. Perhaps it would be polite to allow Rasentep to see the game in person before he was asked to commit to this favor for you. Trying to get in the good graces of the colony was certainly not as easy as it used to be, and they were very insistent on this game. Just what had happened since he last met them in the third stratum? Of course, we just happened to have a demonstration match underway nearby. Would you like to follow me? With a sweeping gesture of the antennae, the ant seemed to politely suggest they step this way. When Rasentep unfolded his arms and began to move, the ant took that for the ascent it was in turn to lead the way. Rasentep followed while exchanging mental communications with his servants at a rapid pace. None of them had heard of this game before, which seemed odd, seeing as how the colony was so insistent on it. Determined not to be manipulated or taken advantage of, the Carmado resolved to be wary. As an elder, he had lived for centuries and refused to allow some ants who had only been alive a few years to get the better of him. Moving through the fortress, they eventually came to a wide expanse of a chamber, in which the center had been sunken into the ground. Indeed, there was a game already underway, the players engaged in this tunnel ball, but there was something shocking that seized Rasentep's attention. Both teams shared the same composition, a Carmado elder and their Setsula attendants. To think there were already elders who had sacrificed their dignity for this spectacle. Just what had the colony offered them? Their guide turned back to face them. Here, I invite you to watch. If you have any questions at all, I am happy to provide all the answers that you wish. From their vantage point, it was easy to look down and see the details of the game. Rasentep turned to look over the rail, not entirely comfortable with what he was seeing. It appeared to be a contest of magic. The Setsula, anchored by their bonded Carmado master, were engaged in a battle of wills, flinging spells at each other while also shielding and throwing up barriers to defend their own side. At first, he wondered if the ball were being entirely ignored by both sides, but on closer inspection, he could see it was actually the entire focus of both teams. The barrage of spells was entirely designed to try and push the other team away from the sphere. One team was trying to advance, looking to create a wedge and drive into the foe's formation, while the other sought to absorb the pressure and hold the line. The play style adopted by your fellow Carmado has been most fascinating to us, their host told them. We ants play a more physical game, with charging, dashing and blocking being key elements of our strategy. On the other hand, teams formed of your people view it as an entirely mind-based exercise. I personally have seen several matches where neither side physically touched the ball. Well, of course, what need was there to touch the ball? The Carmado prided themselves on their magical superiority. Moving it with force, or wind, or stone, or any of a dozen other types of mana would suffice. What Rasentep could see, and the ant couldn't, was the interplay between the Carmado and Setsula on both sides. The manipulation of energy, the rapid blitz of thoughts traveling between them, the deep, spiritual bond that all servants shared with their masters, and vice versa. Both teams waxed and waned, ebbed and flowed, their minds working in perfect harmony to create a beautiful song of mana and will. Eventually, there was a breakthrough. A slight weakness in the defending team created an opening, and the attackers were quick to pounce. A pillar of stone speared out of the ground, punting the ball forward, while a surge of wind swept down from above, looking to divert the ball on a tricky angle and direct it to what Rasentep was told was the scoring zone, the enemy team's wall. The defenders, cool under pressure, fell back rapidly while the attackers advanced, maintaining their finely tuned spiritual and mental harmony. Further exchanges of spells followed as the one side sought to destroy the ball, while the other both defended it and attempted to move it close to the wall. Ultimately, the defending team was not able to recover in time, and the attackers managed to slip the ball through their defenses and score. Both sides took a moment to collect themselves, then bowed to their opponents before walking back to their own sides. A dignified display, well suited to the Carmado and their servants. Rasentep was pleased that at least they hadn't forgotten their people entirely. For the next hour, they watched the match play out. Amanzel asked questions and made polite chatter with the ant guide, but Rasentep remained focused on the game. No matter how he thought of it, he simply couldn't understand what his fellow elders were doing down there. When the game finally came to an end, one of the teams being declared the victor, both teams bowed once more, deeper this time, in a show of mutual respect. Well, what did you think of it? Their guide asked them, cleaning her antennae gently. I want to speak with them, Rasentep announced suddenly, causing Amanzel to pause a moment, frowning. Meetings between Carmado were formal, arranged affairs. This sort of spontaneous meeting, between three elders no less, was rare, to say the least. Of course you can, the guide announced cheerfully. I'll let them know. It didn't take long to arrange, and soon Rasentep was down on the ground level, his servants around him, their posture and expressions carefully schooled lest they shame him and themselves before their peers. When the ritual greetings and pleasantries had been exchanged, he was finally able to address the other Carmado and ask them his burning question. Why are you engaged in this activity? He said. What is it that motivates you to participate? I admit, it is not as unseemly as I first thought when I heard of it, but I still don't understand why elders such as yourselves would play such a game. The other elders exchanged a brief glance before one turned toward him, folding her hands across her chest. There are several answers I could give, the one who had named herself Hollentep stated, but I will give that which is most relevant to me. To better perfect the union between master and servant, this game provides an excellent test. Our bond is tempered when we apply heat, and outside of battle, sufficient challenge can be difficult to find. By engaging in this game, I find that my Setsula and I are able to hone and sharpen our connection, root out the weaknesses that lie within us all and improve ourselves. The other Karmado nodded slightly, to indicate his profound agreement. Rasentep frowned. They wanted to improve their bond. There were hundreds of ways to do that, as Karmado had done ever since they had first joined themselves with the Setsula. How was this any better? I do not believe it is necessary to engage in such a thing as this to hone the bond I share with my servants, he said, a little stiffly. You don't want to play? Hollentep said. She flicked her eyes to his Setsula, causing Amanzel to stand straighter. I can understand why. Rasentep's eye twitched. What do you mean by that remark? He invited her to explain. Hollentep kept her expression and thoughts completely smooth. It seems obvious that if we were to compete against each other, you would not emerge the victor. She was saying he would lose. That he and his servants would lose. He saw red. Those, he stated, eyes narrowing to an unseemly degree, are fighting words. Hollentep smiled an ever so slightly too broad smile. When shall we play? She challenged him. 1664 Shifts in the Sanctum Part 1. Legends say that Horgran the Butcher is sustained by slaughter, that the fields of death left in his wake are all that he needs to survive. The hatchet cult are difficult to work with, even for a group accustomed to affiliating with the deranged and demented. Glorifying acts of butchery, they certainly know how to serve a good steak, obsessing over meat to an entirely unhealthy degree. The ancient they deify has no such concern for the thing he cuts apart. Those who dream of Horgran are swept into a whirlwind of red-stained metal and hunks of flesh. The iron sands now stand in the place where the ancient rose to the surface. Even now, blood still stains the ground there. Perhaps it always will. Excerpt from Collective Wisdom of the Cults, by Granin Lazus. The Nameless One looked down on her handiwork, pleased with the result. This carver had been working in a mine for 3 days straight. Obsessed with removing and sorting ores, she had evolved and mutated herself almost exclusively for this purpose. As a result, she had become able to smell rare minerals and her mandibles became excavation tools without peer, capable of shearing through stone and scooping out the precious metals within. She even had glands that modified her acid to attack stone and leave other minerals behind. Despite being so productive in her allotted shift, she had become addicted to unearthing metals, refusing to rest, ignoring food, driving herself to the point of exhaustion. Luckily the Nameless had been able to seize her before it was too late. Now, the carver rested, tucked into an ant-shaped bed, covered by a knitted blanket with an image of the eldest snoozing stitched into the middle. Her carapace gleamed from the wax and polish. Her antennae sparkled after being combed and treated, the fine hairs cleaned and treated to remove dirt and harmful oils, then nourished with a lotion of nameless design. Under one leg, the carver held a small toy version of Solent, the general looking cool and composed as always. After this, the carver would think twice before defying the will of the eldest. The shame would burn within her for weeks, driving her back to the torpor chambers as regular as clockwork. Rested and clear thinking, her work would improve, and perhaps she would eventually realize that the eldest's way was the correct way. Disturbing to think she hadn't been able to appreciate such an obvious thing from the moment she was born. It was almost heretical. Nevertheless, the Nameless had finished her task and soon it would be her time to rest. First, she must report the completion of her work. Moving through tunnels of pure darkness, she ran with ease, following the twists and turns without a single misstep as she navigated her way through the sanctum. When she eventually found her way to the antechamber, she approached the acolyte of duty. The eldest rests, she signed. 8 hours a day, the acolyte signed back. They performed the eightfold genuflection with proper reverence before moving on to discuss the matter at hand. The sleepless stone miner is sleepless no more, the Nameless reported, to which the acolyte nodded, pleased. This is pleasing to the shadow. That one shows great promise and dedication, but must learn to follow the wisdom that has been placed in front of her. You have done well. The Nameless One nodded, well satisfied with the completion of her task. Is there another duty for me to complete before I take my rest? She signed. There is a gathering of the nameless who have achieved your rank taking place in the 7th hour. I advise you to attend. A meeting. The nameless were a ruthlessly organized group and held rigorous meetings at the beginning of every shift, identifying targets, exposing areas of weakness and planning their future expansion. After all, as the colony grew, so too did the demands on the sanctum. However, something like this was most unusual, not least because rank was almost never brought up amongst them. I take it the Shadow has called this gathering. The Nameless one signed. Indeed, the Acolyte signed back. That would explain it. The Shadow rarely called for a gathering of the Nameless, but when she did, it was always a portent of change. The last time this had happened was when the humans had been brought in for training. I will be there, she signed before turning away and scurrying out of the antechamber, making way for the next of the Nameless to make her report. Back into the pitch-black passages of the sanctum she went, exchanging short, silent greetings with her sisters as she passed them. There were many within the passages today, but that was only to be expected. The 4th had grown extremely busy for the Nameless as the colony's presence continued to grow in the stratum, requiring more and more of her sisters to relocate here to keep up with demand. Complacency grew quickly amongst her siblings, the Nameless was sad to admit. If they were not diligent, then sleeplessness would spread throughout the nest like a disease. Despite her best attempts to focus on her duty, the Nameless one couldn't help but wonder what it was the Shadow had in store for them. As the founder of the Order and most devoted follower of the eldest, her word was law to the Nameless, so whatever it was she asked, they would do. She had never steered them wrong, after all. Fortunately, the Nameless did not have to wait long. With less than an hour before her own shift would end and she would go to rest, the meeting began. In a solemn room adjoining the grand resting chamber where the Nameless took their torpor, a gathering of the oldest and most senior of the Order took place. In the center, a pool of shadow and darkness so complete as to be invisible even to the eyes of those who lived in shadow, yet as bright as a sun to their sense of darkness, the Shadow awaited. 1665 Shifts in the Sanctum Part 2. Many assume that Perionon of Blood and Horgran the Butcher are more similar than they are. Horgran is, from what we know, a beast of unfathomable strength and appetite for death, a creature of endless violence. Perionon is not obsessed with blood, or the spilling of it. Perionon is blood. By the very nature of their existence, all things bleed in the presence of the ancient, running like a river, filling depressions in the earth, forming lakes, even oceans. There is wisdom amongst the worshippers of Perionon, for their knowledge of medicine is perhaps the most advanced in the entire dungeon. None have better understood the needs of the body, and the secrets locked away in blood. Perionon rose to the surface in the depths of an ocean, having little contact with the continents and the kingdoms that lived there. That didn't mean they were unaware. Legends tell of the blood tide, when the seas turned red for weeks at a time, dyeing the beaches the dark shade of clotted blood. Excerpt from Collective Wisdom of the Cults, by Granin Lazus. Many in the Order may not realize, but it was the Shadow herself who invented the silent language employed by the Nameless, and it was in this manner that she communicated with them. Limbs dancing gracefully in the darkness, she called them to attention. Thank you for gathering here, she signed. I hope your work has gone well, and I will not keep you from your rest for long. Of course not. The Nameless soundlessly clacked their mandibles to show their amusement. If the Shadow were to encourage them to break one of the eldest's commands, they would eat their own antennae. I have called this meeting to ask something of you, the Shadow continued, though it is not a command, but something you must decide amongst yourselves. This was interesting, and different. The Nameless had a very narrow focus, and they dedicated their all to it. Making decisions among them was a process almost entirely centered around how to better carry out their function, yet somehow the Nameless felt that the Shadow was asking something different of them. Something new. Recently, the Nameless participated in the Battle of the Heart, helping to tip the balance against the filthy and disgusting, ahem. I apologize for that outburst. Tip the balance against the Krath and secure a great victory for the colony. This was the first time you were ever called on to use your abilities in battle rather than to fulfill your purpose. That was true. The circumstances had been unique, requiring the secret shadow techniques of the Nameless in order to help rescue the eldest. Of course she and her sisters were more than willing to help save the eldest, no matter the cost, and it just so happened that in doing so, they had helped secure the heart and win the day for the colony, which they were also happy with. When the mission had been completed, the Nameless had gone back to their regular work, vanishing into the darkness and slipping back into their roles alongside the rest of the colony. It wasn't something they had ever thought they would have to do again, outside of another emergency. I have thought long and hard about this, but I cannot deny how effective the Nameless were in that battle. It feels that it would be a shame to deprive the colony, and the eldest, of your talents in this field, but it is not something I wish to command you to do. The sanctum was created for one purpose only, and you have fulfilled that purpose admirably. Rare praise from the shadow, and the Nameless felt themselves well up with pride. At the same time, they understood what she was asking of them. Would the Nameless allow themselves to be drawn into more conflicts and battle on behalf of the colony? She could already tell it didn't sit right with all of them. They had honed their skills in order to ensure the will of the eldest was respected, not to fight. It would be some time before they were able to come to a conclusion regarding this matter, the Nameless one could already tell. The second issue I must raise is the spread of the sanctum amongst the non-ant population. After the first humans were made nameless, we have had others taken in by the Nameless, and their numbers only continue to grow, the shadow went on. So far, it has not been a problem, but it is becoming clear that some sort of standard procedures must be put in place to welcome and train these new members. It seems clear now that as we grow, the number of irregulars who join us will also grow. It is best that we be ready. This was also sensible. The Nameless looked amongst each other, nodding in agreement. So far, any non-ant who had joined the sanctum had been inducted and trained in a very ad hoc manner. The brood tenders amongst the Nameless had protested vigorously, but it had seemed wasteful to try and create a full curriculum for only a few students. Now it seemed as if a few students would continue to balloon into a steady trickle of applicants, and from there, who knew? With a few final gestures, the shadow departed, leaving them behind, doubtless to return to the side of the eldest and keep them safe. Left behind, the Nameless signed amongst themselves, giving their initial thoughts and impressions about what had been discussed. Tired and needing to rest, the Nameless one excused herself and made her way to the grand resting chamber. After genuflecting, she gladly took her place on the waiting segment, letting her thoughts grow still as she wondered just what lay in store for the Sanctum of Sleep. 1666 Shifts in the Sanctum Part 3. Alongside Caraflare, Kygar the Stormbringer is agreed to most likely be an elemental that has reached the pinnacle of evolution. A creature of storm, lightning and wind, Kygar is a destructive entity by its nature, yet those who dream of the ancient amongst the cloud cult speak of the wisdom and temperament possessed by him. Kygar is patient at times, boiling with fury at others. Like the skies he personifies, the ancient is both friend and foe, clear and nourishing one day, an engine of destruction and chaos the next. When he awakens, the site at which he rose is known to have arisen erupts with lightning storms, pillars of crackling energy rising into the sky and starting a season of hurricanes and storms that lasts for a year. Excerpt from Collective Wisdom of the Cults, by Granin Lazus. I really wish you would stop contacting me to work for you, Cobalt grunted. The Nameless one began to sign, but the carver just waved it away. I don't understand your signs and I don't want to. I've barely been forgiven for betraying my sister, and it certainly doesn't look good that I keep getting pulled into your projects. The Nameless one cleaned her antennae. We don't require you to keep it a secret from her anymore. In fact, if you want to invite Tungstan to work on these projects with you, we would welcome her involvement. Cobalt snapped her mandibles irritably. No thank you. Only one of us needs to be pulled into your murky schemes. The Nameless had developed a certain gesture, a tumbling of the antennae that they used to mimic a human rolling their eyes. She deployed it here. We are solely concerned with enforcing the edicts of the eldest. Is that a bad thing in your eyes? There was something to the Nameless one's scent that caused alarm bells to ring in Cobalt's head. Not at all, she replied quickly. We all love and respect the eldest. Anyway, the work is pretty much done. It was a little suspicious how quickly you were able to gather the necessary materials, but I'm not complaining. It's all done. I'm going home. We thank you for your expertise. Thanks to you, the design has come together beautifully. Also, I believe you have been working for 14 hours now. Cobalt froze. Why would you say that? It's just an observation. How are you so sure it's been that long since I woke up? Quote. Do you want me to answer that question? I do not. Enjoy your rest. Again, Cobalt froze for a brief moment before she went on her way. She would be escorted through the secret tunnels and brought back to the regular side of the mountain fortress before too long, there to rejoin her sister who probably knew exactly where she'd been, but wouldn't mention it. Turn off the lights, the Nameless one signed. With Cobalt gone, there was no longer any need to have the construction site illuminated. After all, every worker was one of the Nameless. In a blink, everything was shrouded in darkness. Just the way they liked it. It would take a little time before this new area of the sanctum was ritually made pure. There could be not the slightest hint of pheromones, not the tiniest glint of reflected light, nor any sound at all, and though the work was mostly done, it was too much to ask anyone to build in total silence. Though they would, of course, do their best. It hadn't been a small job, and as always, the construction had to be conducted in total secrecy. The new compound had been constructed adjoining the main sanctum within the mountain nest in the fourth, a new space in which they would conduct the business the shadow had given them. In fact, if the Nameless One wasn't mistaken, that work was now due to begin. After all, there was no time like the present. Again, through the darkness the Nameless One went, scuttling through the chambers and passages until she came to the deepest room, right in the heart of the new complex. Therein, she saw them. Youths, human, Golgari, folk, Brathian. All blindfolded, standing barefoot on the newly hewn floor, while the Nameless watched over them. Orphans all, they had reached out to the Nameless, and the Nameless had responded. Brought from the territories of the colony in the 2nd and 4th strata, they had been adapted to the mana at this depth before they had been allowed to come here, within the sanctum, to begin their education. That is, of course, if they really wanted it. The sanctum of sleep would never force anyone to join their ranks, yet they would not turn anyone away who truly wished to serve. The youths waited, silent and unmoving, feeling their surroundings, the air on their skin, the faint sounds in their ears. Despite the strange surroundings and conditions, they showed no fear, unmoved by the ants who moved around them, sending eddies through the air and brushing their antennae against their clothes. A greeting, of sorts. Also a test. If one was not comfortable in the shadows, then this was not where they belonged. Yet the Nameless had chosen well, or perhaps the children had, for they did not flinch, showing that they were indeed in the right place. Hours ticked by until finally the Nameless moved on to the next stage. Before long, the children were climbing up the walls, using the prepared footholds to hang from the horizontal bars set into the roof. Most didn't last long, falling onto the padding placed below. After a time of rest, they climbed again. The Nameless One watched it take place, the first training of these new Nameless, and was struck once again by the wisdom of the eldest. When they had spoken, the eldest had said that all must rest 8 hours a day, and the Nameless One had believed that they had been speaking to the ants. Now, she watched as many of the races of the world were inducted into the sanctum of sleep, and realized that her thinking had been too narrow. All must rest 8 hours a day. What she saw here, in this chamber, was just the beginning. Eventually, everyone would know the wisdom of the eldest. Everyone. It was just a matter of time. 1667 Border Tensions. Ruminomenex is a creature of change and flux. The shaper of earth creates and destroys in a constant cycle, guided only by her own inexplicable design. There are some who suspect the ancient is an elemental of stone or earth, but the cultists who worship her do not believe so. In their dreams, they have caught glimpses of Ruminomenex through the ever-shifting mountains in which she makes her home and describe her as a sturdy, dense, animal-like creature, with skin that shifts and changes, flowing like water just as the mountain around her does. When she surfaced, Ruminomenex found her way to a mountain range, which promptly collapsed, only to be remade. According to the Ancients' wishes. The Ancients' spear is how the range is now known, though most have no idea why. How they explain away the pillar-like mountain, easily twice as tall as the next highest, I have no idea. Excerpt from Collective Wisdom of the Cults, by Granin Lazus. Look down there, the scout said, keeping her scent as light as possible. Do you see? I do, Bella whispered back. These tunnels were far from the mountain nest of the colony, right on the edges of the territory they had claimed. Barely patrolled and not fully explored, they were dangerous in the extreme, filled with powerful monsters who looked to re-establish their territories after the wave had died down, but there were other perils lurking as well. In the distance, barely visible at all to her ant eyes, Bella could see a group moving cautiously, sticking to cover as much as they could while advancing deeper into the land of the colony. A mix of well-armed and armored folk and Golgari were moving together as a group. It was clear that these people were experienced delvers. See their odd movements. There's definitely a sixth member, but we can't see them with the naked eye, the scout told her, and Bella nodded to show her acknowledgement. Thankfully, a coarse shaper like her had ways to overcome her own weaknesses. With a mental command, she urged her loyal pet Hooticus to investigate. Originally a razorbeak shadow owl, Hooticus had been modified by combining the original core with that of a haptivole, an 8-eyed, flightless bird from the first stratum that relied on its extremely keen senses to stay alive. Floating on soundless wings, her pet flitted from shadow to shadow, melting into the darkness as it drifted closer. While it was still hundreds of meters away, Hudicus was able to confirm the scout's suspicions. They've concealed themselves from sight, hidden their heat signature, muffled their sound and masked their mana, Bella noted softly, and the scout waggled her antenna in exasperation. Going so far to try and remain hidden, just who was this shy guest in the colony's lands? Despite all the precautions they'd taken, they hadn't succeeded in hiding their shadow, and it was this little pocket of energy that Hudicus had picked up on. With so little information, she still wasn't able to identify them, and that was precisely the reason she had come all the way out here. They're coming deeper. We need to pull back, the scout told her, and Bella agreed. Ordering Hudicus to keep an eye on the invaders whilst keeping himself concealed, she retreated further into the tunnels, doing her best to follow the scout's lead. So far from the colony and without support, she had to rely on her pets to keep her safe, but there was no guarantee they would be able to defeat some of the deadly monsters roaming these tunnels. Remaining hidden was the safest bet, so they kept low and out of sight as much as possible while Bella received a steady stream of updates from Hudicus. As expected, the Delvers had shown themselves to be capable. They fought when they had to, avoided any other conflict and continued to make their way deeper into the tunnels. Just what were they here for? The scouts had reported seeing several of these Delver groups sniffing around starting 2 weeks after the wave receded, yet it still wasn't known why. At first, the council had thought it was simply a matter of Delvers plumbing the dungeon for wealth and experience, as they always did. Yet these groups behaved oddly. They didn't fight that much, concentrating more on covering ground than defeating monsters. They didn't bother to fully harvest the monsters they did defeat, which was highly unusual for Delvers. Lastly, there was the secret of the hidden person, smuggled into every group. After failing to identify the invisible tagalong, Bella had been called in to investigate. Only scouts and core shapers were allowed to range this far from the nest, and the scouts had repeatedly failed, despite their best efforts. The ants tailed the Delvers for hours, waiting for an opportunity to present itself. After fighting and sneaking their way through the tunnels, doing their best not to draw attention, the Delvers decided to establish a base camp. Using various methods of concealment, they pitched their tents, laid out their supplies and made themselves comfortable. Clearly, they intended to be in these tunnels for an extended period. The camp itself was almost as well hidden as the secretive figure, invisible to the eye, all signs of mana erased, and yet, the hidden person still didn't reveal themselves. Bella didn't have a choice, she would have to use desperate measures. Reaching into the bag slung beneath her carapace, she withdrew a glass cylinder. "Stand back," she warned the scout. Inside, a small creature could be seen, wiggling happily as she lovingly tapped the glass with her antennae. The thought leech was native to the 5th stratum, but this one was modified. Normally, the parasite was able to hunt by homing in on the thoughts of their targets, helping them find more intelligent monsters with larger brains. This little one was different. It didn't eat brains, but thoughts. Hudicus returned, swooping down on silent wings before picking up the cylinder and flying away. After 30 tense minutes, the owl returned, dropping the leech, still safe in its containment, back into her mandibles. "Well done, Hudicus," she praised him, but the owl merely turned his head and started tidying his feathers. He was always trying to act aloof. "And how did you go, my little hungry one?" she said to the leech, who wriggled happily. Regurgitating thoughts wasn't easy for the leech, and she hated making him do it, but she couldn't think of any other way to achieve their goal. After she processed what the leech had managed to steal, she understood why their foes were being so secretive. "It's a priest from the Church of the Path," she hissed to the scout. "They're hunting for members of the colony. 1668 Serve the Path. It has long been assumed amongst the cults that Braxon is a type of monster known as a titan, though we have no idea where in the dungeon they may originate. More accurately, if they are known to any amongst the cults, they have chosen not to share it with this author. Due to his tremendous height, there were many who saw the ancient and survived to record it. Humanoid, with pale blue skin and a beard of frost, Braxton's height has been variously recorded as between 1 and 5 kilometers. The great crown of ice atop his head is reportedly a focus for his power, which soaks in all heat around him, creating an area of almost absolute zero. Braxton rose close to the city of Wellern, now lost to time. Situated beside a great lake, the city was instantly frozen solid the moment he emerged from below the ground. Although the ruins have long since been cleared away and the dead laid to rest, the lake itself is still yet to thaw. Perhaps it never will. Excerpt from Collective Wisdom of the Cults, by Granin Lazus. It was easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. This maxim had been well understood around Pengara for thousands of years, from the smallest of children to the mightiest of emperors. People were cautious by nature, hesitant to take on risk, loath to chance the worst-case scenario, no matter how unlikely it might be. If you had confidence in your purpose, surety in your footing along the path, yet others did not share your faith and barred the way, then perhaps this was not an impediment, but an opportunity. An opportunity to seek forgiveness. A most holy calling. Alir Vinting, Grand Priest of the Way, had cause to seek forgiveness many times in his life. He was a man of decisive action, unwilling to sit still when the path was clear in front of his feet. It was the reason he had risen so far in the church. It was the reason he would rise even higher. The Church of the Path saw the ants for what they were, a spiritual test and resource to be exploited. When the dungeon threw up monsters such as these, it was a cause to rejoice within the faith. The dungeon was created to shape and mold the faithful, to provide for them and make them stronger. Within the nests of the colony waited a harvest more rich than any in centuries, and it would be the act of a blasphemer, heretic and fool to leave it untouched. Alir rose from the woven mat on which he prayed, his knees sore, as they always were after an hour of devotions, but he embraced the pain. He had endured far worse in times of penance and was accustomed to this daily ritual. Out the window before him, he saw the brilliant, shining waters of the fourth stratum. Winds filled with the energy of light and life brushed against his face, and Alir allowed himself a small smile. He felt as if the dungeon were affirming his mission, anointing his purpose. "Have you finished your absolutions, Grand Priest?" A voice called softly from behind him. Reaching down, he brushed himself down before turning to face the deaconess Martha Scott. Plain of face, of middling height and unassuming figure, she nevertheless radiated a certain intensity, an outward expression of the iron faith that she contained within. "I have," he said. "Have any of the teams returned this morning?" Straight to business as always, Alir focused on the matters at hand. Martha shook her head. "They have not, Grand Priest." Alir tsked and frowned. There were 8 teams in the dungeon right now, one of which should have returned yesterday. "The delvers in this city assured me they were up to the task," he said. "I remain unconvinced. More will be coming," Martha told him. 3 ships set out from the Silver City a week ago. It shouldn't be long before they arrive. "We must be cautious," Alir stated, nodding to himself. "Probe carefully. If the ants learn of our intentions too early, then the following steps become progressively more difficult." "What if they already have?" Martha asked, a little hesitant. "It's odd for a team to be an entire day late returning from the dungeon." "If they find us, then they find us," he said. "I would rather operate in secret, but if I must walk in the open, then I shall. That's why we're here, after all." He gestured vaguely toward the mountain, but the deaconess understood. "Green Mountain doesn't recognize the ants as a civilized race," she said. The kingdom of Green Mountain was a stubborn, traditional place. A firm martial tradition meant many of the youth here became delvers or enlisted with the Legion, who maintained a strong presence on the mountain. Recognizing monsters as a civilized race? Never. Even the Bruinchi, children of the Mother Tree, weren't welcome here. The folk were barely tolerated and the sophists were killed on sight. Hunting the ants out of Green Mountain was perfectly legal, even if some communities on the Fourth would find it distasteful. The ants learning what they were doing would simply make it more difficult to probe the edges of their territory, but not impossible. After all, the tunnel networks beneath the mountains were vast and incomprehensibly tangled. The local delvers had access to detailed maps and guides that had been constructed over thousands of years, the ants did not. Even if there were millions of them, it would take years to find every path into their lands. More tests were needed, more elixir was needed. A single ant was able to produce so much. If Alir could replicate that extraction, he would be able to prove what a golden hoard that ant nest really was. Would the Silver City deny him then? He didn't think so. "The path lies clear before us, Martha. A difficult road to walk, with trials and tribulations aplenty, but vast, vast rewards at the end." The deaconess bowed low. "Praise the path." 1669 Security. Odrin the father of monsters is both well known, as far as ancients go, yet also shrouded in mystery. The origin cult who worship him aren't particularly helpful in this regard. Ask 2 of them the same question and you are liable to get 5 different answers. As far as we can discern, it is not believed that Odrin was the very first monster spawned in the dungeon, but he is believed to be extremely old, perhaps the oldest of all the ancients. Referred to as the father of monsters, some believe he is the source of all creatures that spawn in the dungeon, though this view is not very widely held. We know the dungeon itself is responsible for the creation of monsters, though it may be possible the ancient initiated or perhaps contributes to that process. Piercing the veil of mystery around Odrin is difficult, yet we can gain clues about their nature from the evidence they left behind. Several sources seem to conclude that they rose in the frozen north during the rending, amongst the steppes and foothills of the Skyhorn Range. Historical records are hard to find, but scraps have been found that seem to agree an unstoppable tide of monsters poured out of the caves and fissures in the north, leading many in the cults to believe that Odrin is capable of spawning hordes of creatures all of his own. Who can say how many monsters who rise from the depths are, in fact, his children? Excerpt from Collective Wisdom of the Cults, by Granin Lazuz. I don't have time to deal with this issue, Solent said, her tone as flat and logical as ever. The invasion goes on and we cannot pause our preparations for even an instant, lest we hand the initiative back to the Krath. Sloane and Victor rubbed their antennae into their temples. Solent was an asset to the colony, nobody could deny that, yet dealing with her was more than a little frustrating at times like this. We aren't asking you to come back to the Fourth and manage border security, Sloane told her, not for the first time. We are asking if we can review the allotment of resources to the Fifth. The family is pouring everything into the Fifth campaign, everything, and it's become impossible for us to secure our borders here in the Fourth as quickly as we need to. Unless we get more bodies into the tunnels, we risk our territory being compromised by these interlopers. These Church of the Path interlopers. You know what's going to happen if they manage to capture one of us, don't you? Yes, Solent said without emotion. I know what they will do. We cannot allow that to happen. One of our sisters suffering that fate was one too many. We need scouts to map out the tunnels, soldiers and generals for security, carvers to build defenses, mages to help all of them and core shapers for the most far-ranging work. With what we have available, it will take months, if not years, to fully seal off all of the tunnels. There are thousands of them down there. The little general shook her head. I cannot accept any less than what I have requested. If our offensive stalls out before the next wave arrives, then we risk far more than just a few ants being taken by the Church. So far the Krath have failed to take any of us, but if they do, it will be a far worse fate than anything the priests of the path can inflict. Already they are regrouping and fighting us in the tunnels. As more of them gather and join forces against us, the worse our opposition will become. If we don't strike now, while our mandibles are sharp, then we run the risk of losing everything that we have gained. Sloane clacked her mandibles in frustration. Are you sure you aren't simply allowing your obsession with winning to cloud your judgment? If the colony cannot afford to fight on these two fronts, then shouldn't we be focused on protecting what we have, rather than fighting an impossible war? What will the eldest say if they wake up and hear that their sisters have been captured by the Church and it could have been prevented? Victor pointed out, are you willing to accept the consequences if that happens? It was the eldest's idea to invade the Fifth in the first place, Solent pointed out. I don't doubt they will support my decision to ensure that we are successful and achieve what we set out to do. Sloane let her antennae slump down. Fine, we won't divert any resources from the conflict in the Fifth and will hold our territory as best we can in the meantime. I appreciate that, Solent said. I promise I will not fail the colony. With that said, the little general turned and walked out, leaving the others behind in the small meeting chamber in which they had adjourned. This is going to be hard, Sloane, Victor said after a long, tense silence. If we pull back, then we invite more pressure. If we try to hold the line, we create gaps in our defenses. Even if we do everything perfectly, there's just too much ground to cover. It could end badly, Sloane agreed, nodding her head as she thought. The more she considered the possible outcomes, the grimmer it became. Even if it was only the odd exploratory Delver team looking for stray ants right now, that didn't mean it would stay that way. Escalation was almost inevitable. The more the ants hid themselves away, the more emboldened the hunters would become, pressing deeper into colony territory and increasing the risk of a serious incident. If an ant was taken, or maybe more than one, then what? The generals knew exactly where these teams were based. It hadn't been hard to find out using their contacts and diplomatic corps. Going to war against an independent mountain kingdom wasn't something they could sustain right now. Doubly so when the close ties to the Silver City were taken into account. Yet, the worst-case scenario kept rising in her head, refusing to be pushed back down. If ants were taken, and the eldest awoke to find out what had happened while they slept, what were the chances they wouldn't retaliate? And if they did, assaulting Green Mountain and annihilating the guilty, the colony would inevitably be drawn into a war that would span the entire fourth stratum. All of Pangara could be plunged into the conflict. An endless war that burned empires to the ground even as the dungeon grew stronger and stronger with every passing day. This is bad, she said. Really bad. 1670 politicking. We are worried about your future. It was an odd day. Alice Airy had not expected to be seated across from a monster when she had woken up that morning, yet indeed, here she was. The room itself was opulent, which shouldn't be too surprising, considering whose ship it was. Neutral ground, they'd said, since they were unwilling to meet within the Green Mountain itself. A smart decision. Within the confines of the city, they would be treated like the dungeon spawn that they were. Was that carpet really woven from amber frost fiber? And who thought of putting a carpet in a ship? Surely the damp. She shook her head. It was no business of hers. Of all the irritating things in front of her that she had to deal with, by far the most was the creature across the table from her. Positively hideous. Its carapace was a russet red, except for the rear section, which was pitch black, much like the beast's multifaceted eyes. With fine hairs sticking out of its antennae, the monster was often fidgeting, cleaning its antennae or using its middle or rear legs to scrape alongside its carapace in a disturbing display. The more she sat across from it, the less inclined Alice was to remain in the room. Her translator, a fiercely mustachioed man named Inger, was staring at her, waiting for a reply he could communicate via mind bridge to his opposite on the other side of the table. And this was perhaps the most offensive thing of all. "You are worried about our future," she said, restraining herself from fully expressing her incredulity. "I hardly see how our future is any of your business." Was it a threat? Was this disgusting thing threatening her and her people? The very thought that these monsters were allowed to roam free, sitting here at this table under the protection of a Brathian conglomerate, no less. It was outrageous, and she couldn't for the life of her think why the Legion hadn't exterminated them long ago. Letting an ant colony live this long was without precedent. Everyone knew how devastating an outbreak of ant monsters could be. Everyone. I see there is some confusion. The translator beside her kept a running dialogue, speaking aloud as soon the words were sent into his head. "We do not mean to threaten you, but to ensure that the potential for harm to befall your city is not realized. If you continue to allow delving teams leaving your kingdom to infringe on our territory, the chance that something goes wrong will only increase." How was that not a threat? "We are under no obligation to place restraints on the Delving Union. We don't recognize your territory at all. I'm not sure why we are here talking to begin with." She muttered the last sentence more out of frustration than anything else. No doubt the translator passed it along, but thankfully the ant didn't say anything. They both knew why she was there, because the Brathian had threatened to put a stranglehold on Green Mountain's trade. How these monsters had that sort of leverage, she would dearly like to know. "You don't have to recognize our territory, or us as a sapient species." "Why would we recognize you? You're dungeon-born." The ant hesitated for a moment. "To be accurate, we are born from the queens, not from the dungeon." Alice shrugged. "It's the same thing to us." "Indeed. Well, as I was saying, we do not require these things from you, we simply wish for you to prevent delvers from traveling beyond the markers we will place in the tunnels." "Why would we do that?" Alice asked, staring hard at the ant. "Because they are hunting you like monsters. That's what delvers do." Again, the ant cleaned her antennae, dragging them through her elbows in a truly discomfiting display. They were just so hideous. Filled with disgust, Alice kept her face smooth. She was a trained diplomat, and even here, faced with this thing, she would act like it. "I will speak clearly," the ant said finally. "Right now, the eldest of our colony is undergoing evolution, and we expect them to wake up imminently. If, at that time, they find out that delvers from your kingdom have successfully been hunting and killing their siblings, they will be very angry." Alice folded her hands on the table. "So it's threats after all. Not that I should expect better from monsters." The ant shook its head in a strangely human motion. "I will repeat myself, this is not a threat, but a warning. We do not control the eldest and would fail if we tried. Of course, we will not disavow their actions, and should it come to war, then we will fight. What we would like is to create conditions where that course of events does not come to pass. Conditions that conveniently favor you," Alice pointed out. "Green Mountain will never bow to threats, and we will not change our policies based on coercion. The Delving Union has always been allowed to act within their charter, and that isn't going to change." "Are we done here?" "We will pay you," the ant said. Taken by surprise, Alice Airy blinked, then smiled. Unable to get their way through bluster and threats, now the creatures wanted to pay them off. We can't be bought by monsters, she declared firmly, her gaze hardening. The longer this meeting went on, the more contempt she had for these creatures. The ant rummaged in a little pouch slung on its side, using a foreleg to extract a document and then slide it gently across the table. This is our offer. Alice resisted the urge to roll her eyes as she picked it up and turned it over. Doubtless it was. She coughed. We hope that will be sufficient, the translator said, trying to get a glimpse of the paper's contents. She hastily folded it and stuffed it in her pocket. I will consult with my superiors, she said with all the dignity she could muster.